Well, just a couple of days until we know the draw for the 151st Kentucky Derby. We kind of know the field basically. Maybe a few horses will defect over the next several days. We know enough, I think, to talk a little bit about the pace of the race. We're going to do that. But first, we're going to talk about just some general stuff about betting on the Derby, managing your bankroll over the course of the day and the week, stuff like that. So hopefully you'll find that beneficial. It'll be Bailey and I next on Horse Sense Kentucky Derby Almost Edition.
Welcome back to another edition of Horse Sense. As always, I'm Bailey Armour, joined alongside world champion unicycle rider Scott Shapiro. The one and only here in the flesh.
I do that in my sleep?
Search yourself up in the New York Times. It's all in there. You'll see it. Just trust me.
Do I have steroids in my body?
I sure hope not, Lance Armstrong.
Unicycler. Okay, not bicycler. Okay.
Unicycle.
Go on.
Way cooler.
Way
more circus. Anyways, this week we are going to talk about betting the Kentucky Derby. Of course, as we film this on Thursday, we are just 9 days away from the big one, some could say. And we've got a lot to talk about, a lot of pretty interesting stuff this week. When you sent me the rundown, personally, I was really excited for some of the stuff that we're going to cover today. But before we do, I got to let you know about our exclusive one-of-a-kind promotions on Xpressbet and FirstBet. We are bringing back the Exactathon for Kentucky Derby and Kentucky Oaks Day. It's going to be $10,000 each day. If you win or hit 6 or more exactas each day, you'll win your share of $8,000 in bonus cash. And then the player or players who hits the most exactas on Churchill Downs on Oaks or Derby Day will win their share of an extra $2,000. So $10K total per day. That's going to be the same offer on Oaks Day and Derby Day. You've got 14 or so races on Derby Day, probably.
Usually
that's what 14, it's been historically. Yeah. So 6. It's a pretty good number if you ask me. So make sure you opt into that promotion when it goes live early next week. And Scott can let you know about all of his media appearances this week. What you got going on?
All of them. Not many. Yeah, not much going on in terms of media this week. But we do have the return of my spaces. You know, this week I'm going to do a solo one, a rare solo one. Had someone lined up, but I like the idea because I'm going to do a 15, 20-minute solo conversation on the Derby. Won't get to do much of that, and then I'll take some questions from my listeners, if you will, or whatever they're called, viewers, listeners on Spaces. So that'll be it, and then really looking forward to next week. But we still got a little Keeneland. We got Churchill-Downs opening day. So while we'll talk Derby on here, plenty of action to be had this week on FirstBet and Xpressbet as well. Well, Bailey, betting the Derby in many ways and the Derby day can be the same. I mean, it's horses. You're still betting against the public in a pari-mutuel setting. You're still placing your wagers on Xpressbet and FirstBet. 7-2 still pays 7-2, but there's some differences as well, both in the way you approach the day or should approach the day or want to maybe consider approaching the day. And then the same with the Derby itself. Figured maybe we start talking about the day itself. You walk in the door or you're planning ahead first. And then you'll get to the Derby, obviously, one of the last things on the agenda. But I know you bet the Derby before. I know not nearly as much as me. Do you generally... Well, A, you don't have the experience. B, you're not the degenerate that I am. But do you usually bet? Not to put you on the spot here, but do you usually bet look at any of the other races beforehand, or just a couple? I mean, I know they're big races, so that you know about them now. But before you had this job, you probably bet on the Kentucky Derby. But did you bet on the other races and such?
Before I started working in horse racing, it was mostly just Oaks and Derby. And then as I have my career's grown and I've moved into an actual wagering role, I've definitely started to play some more undercard races. I really like playing trifectas in kind of the middle of the day and then seeing how I can boost my bankroll for later in the day. But I know that you have some other wagers that maybe you like to play that I don't necessarily play that I could be learning more about.
Well, yeah, I just kind of wanted to get, to get a feel and just kind of talk about it in general, not necessarily, critiquing you, but just out of curiosity more than anything. But I think what's important on a big day, this could fit anything, but Derby Day is where we're at, and it's the biggest of days, and it's 14 races, like you mentioned before. You want to handicap the card first. You want to go through the races. If you're only going to handicap 5 races, that's fine if you're not going to bet the other ones. But I think personally, knowing where your opinions lie and where you stand on these races, if you're any sort of serious player, you want that first, because the amount of wagering options that you have is endless on this day. Not only do you have, all the traditional wagers, but you have all these horizontal wagers that are additional pick threes on the turf, on the dirt, all these options. So there's so many ways for a beginner horse player. I would say you're going to stick to the win, stick to win betting, maybe win and place betting if that's your doing. I prefer win betting for any level. But I think, as a middle level player, you really want to come up with your opinions, find them out, and then look at the wagers, decide on your bets from there. I think that's one really important thing. Remember too, it's a long day. This doesn't apply to someone, like yourself, that, as you said, you're still not betting every race, and if you are, you're not betting the same amount as you will on the Derby and the Oaks. But I think for a lot of us, we're really excited. We've been looking forward to this day all year long. You wake up, it's 11 a.m. We all want to, or a lot of us want to wager early. And I happen to sometimes like those races as much or more. And, if you know the circuit, you might know those horses as well. But you don't need to bet all the races, and it's a lot of races. You want to, think about your bankroll and your budget more, because not only is it 14 races, but they're stretched out. This is a long day. Yeah, it's a really long day. So you really want to plan for that. So I think from that perspective, probably, like, again, a beginner level player, probably not going to think about those issues as much. You're just going to have a little bit of fun. You probably have a little bit, your budget is entertainment. You want to win, but it's not as if it's life and death. Whereas, most people going into this, and probably that are watching this show to an extent at least, are going to, wager at least somewhat substantially on Derby Day and maybe the whole week. And just remember, it's a marathon, not a sprint. In terms of the Derby, you mentioned trifectas, the Derby itself. Remember, 20 horses. How do you normally bet on the Derby, or is it different each year based on how many horses you like, which ones you like, the prices of them, or do you have general wager you play?
I think it has varied definitely based on the number of horses I like. If I like a lot of horses, well, it's, maybe it's too many horses and you've got to narrow your list down. I have been more recently an exacta and try player. That's where I like to take my attention, because I personally find that I find a lot of value there, especially in races with these big full fields. But I keep being drawn back to the superfecta. I'm not really a superfecta player, but I think that with this field of 20, this is probably a better opportunity to become or try a superfecta player, even with, if you reserve a little bit of your bankroll at the end of the day to try something with the super, stick to what branch out a little bit. If I did want to start playing the supers, especially in a race like the Kentucky Derby, what kind of advice do you have for something like that?
Well, it's hard to play it without the superfecta is one wager on the Derby menu that it's hard to play with a low level budget. And there's a very specific reason for that. It's not the 20 horses, which obviously makes it tougher to hit, but it doesn't necessarily limit you from playing smaller tickets, that have a chance. The thing is it's $1 minimum on Derby Day, unlike the rest of the year where it is 10-cent minimums. And the reason for that, one might ask, and I don't want to go into history because I don't know exactly, but I do know that originally that was a rule created when their 10-cent supers just got the lines too long, people putting in tickets. And I think that was the intent, for the live audience, but it's kind of become a thing. And it's, you might hear, some of us talk about, when there's $1 pick 5 instead of 50-cent or 20-cent pick 5 or 6 or whatever, how it kind of makes you handicap a little bit more seriously. Well, in this case, it really does, or else your tickets are big, and it's just really hard to play this wager unless you're really playing it, with a complete borderline lottery ticket approach without putting, I would say $100, $200 minimum in, because you're already building. Let's just say you like, you single a horse on top, you key a horse that you like in the Derby on top. You got two horses you like underneath. Still, how many horses you want to use for third or fourth? I mean, yeah, if you want to go 1x2 by 4x4, it's very playable, but that's a big ask in the Derby to nail something that, that on point. Not that it hasn't been done, but so I hate to discourage anybody from, beginners, especially from playing any sort of wager that could make, that I find to be one of the most favorable wagers on Derby Day for a horse player because of what I just said. But I think it's biting off a little more than you can chew. I think you would want to stick to, tries and exactas in that race because generally speaking, for a beginner, they're going to pay far nice enough. And even a lower level mid-tier player, I should say, kind of situation.
Oh, absolutely. I've got my sights set on these 6 exactas for the promo. So I feel like I can stick to what I know with exactas. 6 out of 14 isn't an unreasonable number, but this will be my first really serious chasing full Derby Day. I've played, a handful of races on Derby Day in the past and done well. I mean, well enough, but this one I'm going to try to stretch a little bit more and see where I can find some value. So personally, I'm really excited. I think after the draw on Saturday, we'll know better about what we can play. And then, like you said, handicapping that full card to see where you're going to focus your attention and what you're going to stray away from. I know what kind of things would turn me off of a race, but what kind of things would make you toss a race that you weren't going to bet on it on Derby Day?
If I like the favorites and don't see any value behind them and around them in other races. So if I look at a race, there's 8 horses in it and I not navigate or, not navigate. I find myself on the favorite and I think the ones that can beat them are the second or third choices or he or her. Then I go to the next race and I think somewhat similar there. I'm just going to move someone on now. I'm putting a lot of time into it. I don't want you to think that I'm just like, but those are the races that I'm going to skip on Derby Day. Not to say I wouldn't be willing to bet a 3-1 favorite that I think, quote unquote, can't lose, but that's what it would take. I'm looking for spots where I can separate from the public, and then I'm going to be able to be very willing to use logical horses around that, whether that means exactas, trifectas, supers, or whether that means pick 3s, pick 4s, pick 5s. But the last thing I do kind of want to say about it is, to the same point about the supers to the trifectas and exactas, it's not because of the denomination, but cutting back from a pick 5 to if you're a pick 5 player, pick 4 players into the Derby, pick 4s into the Derby are kind of, it's 20 horses. So take that into account. You want to, I want to take shots on this day for scores that I can't get most days. But if you're just looking to win, to grind away a little bit, to make a 4-1 profit or something like that, maybe, consider maybe playing pick 3s and pick 4s instead of pick 5s or exactas or tries, like we said, instead of supers. Well, Bailey, we almost know the post positions for the Kentucky Derby contenders this year, and that will iron out the way we anticipate the race to play out from a pace perspective. But I think at this point, we kind of know the running styles. I'm sure some of them will not show the exact style that we expect, whether that be because they're intimidated with it, with the runners around them. They get out of the gate slow. They want to show more speed, those kinds of things. But I thought it was a good time to talk about the pace of the race and what we might be able to expect. And looking back at some races in the past, it's interesting because in the past, other than the 3 or 4 most recent years, for a while there, it seemed like the perfect trip in the Derby was sitting just off the early pace and being the fastest horse. And American Pharaoh, Nyquist, to name a couple. I think California Chrome, that perfect stalking style that just allowed you to create your own trip. But we haven't seen that of late, and I don't know if we're going to see it in here. What are your thoughts on the Derby? I know you look back at some history and whatnot to, give us some ideas of maybe, a little bit of what we can expect this year, but just for fun as well.
Yeah, I took a look at fractional times and running lines for the 10 most recent Derbies, and we can just focus on the 3 most recent so that we don't get into, a 2-hour conversation about Derby running styles. But our 3 most recent ones, I feel like When something happens one time, it's an exception. When it happens 3 times, maybe it's starting to become a new rule. And the last 3 years or so, with outside of Mystic Dan's year, because you had that big rally between Forever Young and Sierra Leone, and then Mystic Dan, came up the rail. But horses like Mage, horses like Rich Strike, horses like Mystic Dan, Forever Young, Sierra Leone, we've seen these deep, deep, deep closers start to finish in the Derby in a way like I feel like we didn't really see, 15, 20 years ago. You've got some strong closers, and I know that you're confident in one and I'm confident in another. There are definitely some in this year's Derby field that maybe are a little more concerning to me than others, namely with how they're going to get out of the gate in those 20 horses. And of course, that is all going to come down to the post position draw on Saturday. Basically, at least from the ones that I saw, you want to be in between post number 5 and post number 9. I know that
you're going to be that specific with where you want to draw?
Yes, I am going to be that specific with where you want to draw. If you just go back and look at the charts yourself, and you'll see most of these winning horses recently have come from post number 7 or post number 8. There's a reason that 17 is cursed, and especially, not as much now that we have the new starting gate, but you cannot tell me that post position does not factor into
it. Totally matters, but I don't like, it's okay it's an opinion, obviously, but to me, narrowing it down like that, I saw somebody else on Twitter that wanted to talk about, I don't want anybody 11 through 20. It just seems random. Like 11's okay, 9's not. Like that trip could be almost identical. I like, posts matter to me with certain horses, and I think there's the potential of the new gate being tougher on horses from the outside because they kind of had that advantage a little bit from the Ox gate, and the one hole was even worse. But to me, I think you're really, I don't know. Keep going. Well, I mean, I don't know. We could talk about but that's more post positions worthy. Pace, though, the one thing I noticed about this race to kind of segue into this race, because that is good info, and just to piggyback, Mystic Dan was up closer, but he wasn't like, amongst the speed in the race. And outside of that, you had Epicenter, who was normally a speed horse, but that was 3 years ago, was Rich Strike, Epicenter, Zandon, 3 closers in the race. Epicenter more mid-pack, where I'm hoping journalism will sit. The year after that was Angel of Empire, Mage, and then Two Phils, who was much the best. Again, Two Phils was a part of that pace, and hung around, incredibly well. It's a shame we didn't get to see more of that horse. And then, as you mentioned last year, as we've talked about, Forever Young and Sierra Leone, I mean, they're swinging 8, 7, 8 wide. And I think we all pretty much, Brian Hernandez and Kenny McPeak, deserving win with Mystic Dan, but I think we know Forever Young was best in that race. So just all, very interesting. The one thing about this year that is unique, though, I think most often we have some of the lower tier or the upper tier horses, lower priced horses that are going to be up front. You look at this field based on the results of the, the preps and just kind of the way this crop is shaking out. There should be plenty of speed, Bailey, but most of the top quality horses at this point are going to be coming from off the pace.
I feel like you've got, and when I went back and looked at PPs, I've got it pulled up to the side here. You've got 5 or 6 horses that are going to have historically gone and tried for the lead. And then you've got another 5 or 6 that are much deeper closers. And then you've got the other, 8 or however many we draw into the field that are going to kind of shuffle around in the middle. You've got some pretty strong early speed types. And did you happen to catch Citizen Bull's workout from yesterday, the 7 furlong work that he put up at Santa Anita?
Nah, not yet.
Maybe no. That's okay. It was 7 furlongs in 1:24, which is 7 12-second furlongs. And he looked like he was fully unchanging the entire time. I think they're going to take him and maybe run him a little bit differently than a horse like Rodriguez, who's going to go right out to the lead. Is this the year that we see another strong early speed horse? Then you've got to contrast that with the depth of these closers, Journalism, Sovereignty, Sandman. The one thing about Sandman that worries me, especially when we talk about the start of the race, he's been so unlucky in the beginning of his races in past.
Unlucky, or?
I'm being nice. Unlucky. unlucky in the beginning of his recent races. And I think with 20 horses in the starting gate, that does tend to make me a little bit concerned. He's a strong closer, I'll give him that, but that's just so much energy in one spot. So I think that it will set up for other closers rather than these big, strong speed horses.
Well, let me, like I said, we'll talk a little bit more about this next week when we have our official Derby preview and give out our, official thoughts on that, as well as the Oaks in a segment on each of those. But I think for now, what I kind of find interesting is I think there's a chance Citizen Bull with the blinkers off is taking off the pace. I don't love that with a Martin Garcia aboard. I don't know if he's the right rider to make that work. I think it's pretty clear, though. We've got real speed. We got Rodriguez. We've got Owen Almighty. We've got East Avenue. Am I missing anybody there? If it's not Citizen, American Promise, right?
American Promise, yeah.
Right. So I think we know we got that. The one thing that I found interesting and why I'm pushing into my second spot pretty clearly, assuming the draw doesn't hurt him, is Tapan Street, who there are not any stalkers in this field. Normally, there's a lot of those, and they're some of the best horses in the field. They get that trip. I don't think Tapan Street will get the trip of like California Chrome, but picture that middle move that wins the Derby a lot. Real quiet for me comes to mind, but there's been so many of them. He's going to be in the spot he wants, and Luis Saez is going to do everything he can to get him out of the gate. So there's not a lot of horses though in that kind of second tier. There's going to be some horses that end up there. That's just the way races work.
Shuffle there,
paper, because I think I'm hoping that Journalism is in that same mid pack with Cole Battle maybe, and maybe Chunk of Gold. I don't know. And then there's just so many closers. So the post draw is going to be interesting. We will get plenty of conversation on that. I know Jeremy Plonk, our associate colleague and man that runs the blog, will have immediate reaction to that after the draw on Saturday night. But obviously that'll come into our capping as well. But right now, that's my thoughts on the pace. I'm hoping, and I know you are as well, that it plays out like some of the most recent years, right?
I think it's interesting that we're both set up on two different deep closers and have been for.
It's not a deep closer, in my opinion. I hear a lot of people saying that. This is not me being upset. I hear that a lot. I think he's going to be closer up than people think. I mean, he breaks fine. It's kind of hard to tell, right? Because he's been in such small fields that, so maybe you guys are right, but I don't want him to be that. If I'm betting the favorite in the Derby, he's never been that far off the pace. I don't have a lot of doubts about this horse, but I don't necessarily think that he needs to be, 15 lengths out of it to have his best chance.
Maybe a shallow closer come Derby Day. As always, thank you so much for watching another episode of Horse Sense this week as we discussed betting the Kentucky Derby ahead of Under the Twin Spires, all of that action in just 9 days. Make sure that you're subscribed to the Xpressbet YouTube channel. Check each of us out on Twitter, your favorite social media platform, and make sure you opt into those promotions on Xpressbet and FirstBet once they go live next week. Those $20,000 in total exactathons across both days at Churchill Downs. We'll see you back next week with our final thoughts on the Kentucky Derby after the post position draw, and let us know in the comments how you think the race is going to start to shake out on next Saturday.